Hey there, nostril heads. It's time for another grown-up read-along in the Nostril Zone, where we read picture books that are a bit more mature than most. I'm your host, cartoonist Kyle Bridget, and this is Just a Rock. But that's not important right now. At some point it might be, but not now. Because today we're reading The Curious Sofa, a pornographic work by Ogden Weary, which is a pen name for Edward Gorey. The Curious Sofa by Ogden Weary. For others. Alice was eating grapes in the park when Herbert, an extremely well-endowed young man, introduced himself to her. He invited her to go for a ride in his taxicab, on the floor of which they did something Alice had never done before. After they had done it several times in different ways, Herbert suggested that Alice tidy up at the home of his aunt, Lady Celia, who welcomed them with great cordiality. Lady Celia led Alice to her boudoir, where she requested the girl to perform a rather surprising service. Downstairs, the three of them played a most amusing game of Herbert's own invention called Thumb Fumble. They then sat down to a sumptuous tea. After he had finished the washing up, Albert, the butler, an unusually well-formed man of middle age, joined them for another frolic. Herbert and Lady Celia had little difficulty in persuading Alice to spend a few days with them. In the interval before dinner, she perused an album of instructive chromiolithographs entitled Die Liebend und Dreißig Voloft, which Lady Celia had thoughtfully laid out. Colonel Gilbert and his wife Louise came in after dinner. Both of them had wooden legs, with which they could do all sorts of entertaining tricks. The evening was a huge success, in spite of someone fainting from time to time. Alice, quite exhausted, was helped to bed by Lady Celia's French maid Lise, whom she found delightfully sympathetic. The next morning she was wakened in a novel fashion by Lady Celia in time for elevensies. Looking out the window, she saw Herbert Albert and Harold the gardener, an exceptionally well-made youth, disporting themselves on the lawn. They were soon joined by Donald, Herbert's singularly well-favored sheepdog, and many were the giggles and barks that came from the shrubbery. They called up to Alice, who, having put on an ingeniously constructed bathing slip, met them in the pool. At the luncheon, which was al fresco, Lady Celia announced that they were invited to the Gilberts for the weekend. To beguile the tedium of the journey, Albert read aloud from volume 11 of the Encyclopedia of Unimaginable Customs. As they drove up to the house, Lucy, the Gilbert's daughter, and Gerald, her fiancé, an uncommonly well-shaped older man, emerged from an ornamental urn. That evening in the library, Celia, one of the guests who had certain anatomical peculiarities, demonstrated the Lithuanian typewriter, assisted by Ronald and Robert, two remarkably well-set-up young men from the village. Later, Reginald, another remarkably well-set-up young man from the village, provided everyone with the most astonishing little device. Still later, Gerald did a terrible thing to Elsie with a saucepan. The party split into twos and threes before retiring. At breakfast, it was learned that Elsie had expired during the night, and gloom descended on everybody. When a change of scene was proposed, Lady Celia suggested a visit to the nearby seat of Sir Egbert, a dear friend of her youth. When they got there, they found Sir Egbert, an extraordinarily well-proportioned old gentleman, and his friend Louis having a romp on the terrace. They all went indoors and worked up some most intriguing charades. During the light buffet supper, Louis did a dance with a boa. Sir Egbert offered to show them his famous sofa. Alice felt a shudder of nameless apprehension. It stood in a windowless room lined with polar bear fur and otherwise empty. It was upholstered in scarlet velvet and had 9 legs and 7 arms. As soon as everybody had crowded into the room, Sir Egbert fastened shut the door and started up the machinery inside the sofa. When Alice saw what was about to happen, she began to scream uncontrollably. Oh my, what are the upper class doing behind closed doors? Anyway, if you want to know what I'm doing, you can sign up for my Patreon or you can join the channel here on YouTube. And hey, if you enjoy this video, you can hit like and subscribe and maybe check out some of the other great programs in the Nostril Zone. Well, that's my story for the day, so keep your nose clean.
Maybe somewhere you'll find the one who cares. You'll find